As you can see from the title, I'm going to be taking a long break from Earth 616 in the Marvel Comics. I don't know how to put it any differently. I'm pretty fed up with Marvel's 616. I'm not finding a book that is easy to read, easy to follow, a clear, straight storyline that doesn't require a whole lot of setup. I mean, for years I was reading X-Men up until about the House of Powers of X storyline, and then I kind of fell off when it got deeper into the Krakoan era. And then I kind of read the occasional X-Force or, kind of skipped around some of the immortal X-Men. Spider-Man I've tried to keep up with. And Spider-Man's not that bad, but just some of the other things going on in Marvel right now are just a really heavy turnoff in the main 616. And really, guys, there's two main problems that I'm personally finding. If I'm missing anything, make sure to let me know in the comments down below if you're feeling any kind of gripes with how Marvel Comics are going right now. But for me, the biggest thing is that we haven't had a true reboot since like the Secret Wars days. So like post Secret Wars, there was a reboot, and even then it wasn't like a full reboot since a lot of the storylines just kind of continued how they were before the event. But with Secret Wars, we at least kind of had a spot where we can point to and say, you know what, this is a good jumping on point for people to start reading this particular character. Or, this is, at this point, there's only one universe. So this is a really good spot to just start getting into Marvel. You don't have to worry about the Ultimate Universe, any of the other, Earths and stuff like that. You're just kind of getting a clear, relatively clear and consistent story. But since then, things have gotten a lot more complicated. A lot of the storylines are getting really intricate and detailed and require a lot of back history to set up a lot of different events and things like that. And so when stuff like that happens, it's honestly pretty hard to recommend a good book for people to just jump into and to start reading the Marvel Comics. Maybe they're out of the hobby, they're not interested in the hobby. Maybe you're trying to introduce comics to them in general, or maybe they were an avid reader and they've fallen off because they just life got in the way and they want to start reading about their favorite hero again. Now they got to read at least 12 issues to get caught up on what's going on now, so they're not like scratching their heads trying to figure out like what's going on. On a video I posted earlier this year talking about how to get into comics in 2024, I talked about how just walking into your comic book shop and just picking up a comic book and just jumping into a story can be a pretty good way to get started in comics. I mean, it's a really good way. I mean, obviously you're not going to know everything going on in a story, but if you know the basics about the hero that you're trying to read, it's honestly pretty just fun just to walk up, get the newest issue of whatever story that you want to read, and you just start filling in the blanks after the fact. But when you're having to do that with a lot of different characters all at the same time, let's say you're all caught up on Captain America and you want to go and read some Iron Man. Now you got to read a whole bunch of stuff to even figure out what's going on in the current Iron Man mythos. But let's say you take care of all of that, now you want to start reading Ghost Rider. Got a whole bunch of stuff to read there. Now you got to start, figuring out what happened to Moon Knight and stuff like that. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of different stuff going on that can be complicated and a little bit overwhelming, especially for new people that just are completely new to the hobby. And honestly, this isn't to like bash Marvel as a whole. I mean, that's just how comic books are. There's different storylines going on with different people. And so, no hating on that at all. It just can get a little bit overwhelming. And you'll see a little bit why later in this video, why it's pretty overwhelming when, in the case of like trying to find a good jumping on point for some people, it's really overwhelming because you think you're at a good jumping on point, but then you just are really lost and confused. And so it's no fun. It kind of zaps the fun out of the hobby and reading about your favorite heroes. And while it's easy to, jump into stuff like Spider-Man or the Avengers, honestly, their status quos and things like that don't really change. And so it's easy to kind of jump into some of those books. But if you're trying to read on something like Ghost Rider, for example, like I picked up Ghost Rider not too long ago, and this is just a random issue that I had, but I started trying to read Ghost Rider because I love the character of Ghost Rider, but I was so confused trying to figure out what is going on in this story. It doesn't even feel like the Ghost Rider that I would think should feel like the Ghost Rider. And again, it might not be that particular issue. I just grabbed a random one from my short box, but that's besides the point. I mean, it's hard to get interested in a character that you might like because you got to do a whole lot of backstory to figure out why are they here in this position right now and what are the stakes with this particular villain, and it just kind of takes a long time to get acclimated to whatever's going on in the status quo for the villain, for the hero at that time. But the prime example that was really what spurred this whole video was X-Men #1. So you would think a #1 would mean that this is a good jumping on point. It's literally the first issue in this line of books. It's a simple X-Men title. It's not, Immortal X-Men or, like a different name. Like it's X-Men. And so that's supposed to be your indicator that this is a good, jumping on point. You don't really need to know everything else that happened beforehand. If you did, that helps to kind of set the stage a little bit more and give a little bit more nuance to some of the character interactions and stuff like that. But you shouldn't have to read all of the stuff beforehand to know what's going on now, or to get a feel for what's going on now, or, to get an idea of where your different heroes are. That's not the case here. So I read X-Men #1, From the Ashes, A New Beginning. It was not a new beginning because it was basically just a continuation of the Krakoa era, just not with Krakoa. So, like I was reading off and on some of the stuff going on in Fall of X, and I was reading some of the stuff over the years with like X-Force and Immortal X-Men, like I said. But ultimately, I don't know everything that happened in the Krakoa era. I know that Beast kind of went evil at one point, or was evil. Maybe he was a clone. People were like immortal. Like that's literally why it was called Immortal X-Men, because somebody would die and then they would be able to resurrect them from the dead. So I know some of these like big overarching things that might have happened. But like, I don't know what I just read in issue #1. And it was just so confusing because they're in this completely different place, and Beast is walking around, and I don't know if it was like the art style of the artists themselves, and so I'm not trying to bash somebody's artistic abilities because I am not an artist, so I'm not trying to, throw any shade to anyone in particular, but the way that Beast was drawn made it look like he was still this evil beast, and he might not be evil anymore. He might be totally good, and it might just be the artistic style that he was drawn. I don't know. But like, I feel lost trying to read this, and I feel like I need to, catch up on everything that happened in at least Fall of X to figure out why are they here in this position? Why is their base set up in like Alaska? And is it really their base? Because as far as I know, Beast isn't part of the X-Men roster, at least the current roster right now, or maybe he is. I don't know, but it's like, I just feel really lost and confused. And then like the team itself isn't like, not that it has to be like the team from the 90s or anything like that, but like the team doesn't really have a whole lot of diversity. I think there's like 2 telepaths on here and stuff like that. And it's just like, I don't know. It doesn't feel like X-Men, and this isn't an X-Men review, but something like that is just really off-putting, especially to the new person that's wanting to get into comics, because it's supposed to be a new beginning. It's supposed to be a jumping on point, and it's clearly not. And so stuff like that I've been finding really often with some of the other books. Like I said, I tried to read some Ghost Rider. I was lost. I tried to pick up a couple issues of Iron Man. I was pretty lost there. Black Panther is a character that I really like, but I feel like I'm just not going to understand anything going on in Black Panther right now, and that might not be the case. I mean, it might be a super easy book, but I've just kind of been almost like thrown under the bus too many times to really trust. Do I really trust just jumping into a different character? And it's just, there's a whole lot of convoluted stuff going on with some of the different storylines going on with Marvel right now, and so I don't know, I'm just kind of just at an odd place with modern Marvel right now. It just doesn't feel right, which kind of leads into another point I'm going to get into a little bit later in the video. Now, another problem, which isn't a like make it or break it thing, and it's certainly not as big of a problem as my first one, but another problem that I noticed with at least the 616 books in Marvel is that the comics are trying super hard to tie into the MCU. And so prime example of that is something that happened relatively recently in the last, year or two, year and a half, is that they changed Kamala Khan to be a mutant instead of being an inhuman. And that was clearly because in the MCU, at least in her show and in the Marvels movie, she is referenced as a mutant. And so because of that, Marvel basically like killed off Kamala Khan in the comics. And then at this time, the X-Men were still, resurrecting people from the dead. And so they resurrected her, and she had this dormant mutant gene. And so it's just like, I don't know. It's like when they make these blatant storytelling decisions that just kind of undermine what how comics are supposed to be, to where it's not supposed to be a one size fits all sort of thing. Comics are supposed to have a bunch of different avenues that, maybe one person might not like this, maybe they'll want to read this, maybe one person, doesn't like this aspect, but this one other book has that one thing that they're looking for. That's why there's all of these different writers and artists and stuff like that. And so just the decision to shoehorn major changes in 616 to be matching, the MCU, it's just like, even take Nick Fury. I mean, Nick Fury was originally black in the Ultimate Universe, and that's what the MCU got inspiration from with getting Samuel Jackson as Nick Fury. Now, in 616, Nick Fury is a black guy, so it's like, and like, I have no problem with, like, color of skin, obviously, but like, it's just these decisions to just make everything sort of cookie cutter and the same just feels super forced. And that's just not the kind of comic lore that I really like. Because at the end of the day, it's not comic lore, it's just MCU lore at that point. And I will say, with all of these problems that I'm talking about, I'm starting to understand a little bit of the argument between comics and manga, but that's a story for a completely different video. So if you want to see something like that, let me know, because I'm deep in the comic world, but I'm also pretty deep in the manga world, and I have some thoughts to share on that. So let me know down below if you want to know my thoughts on that. It's a weird argument, but there are some points on both sides. Before I move on, if you're liking this kind of content where we talk about comics, the good, the bad, let me know down below if you want to see more videos like this, because honestly, I have a lot to say, so I'd be really happy to share that and just have that conversation, that dialogue with you. With all that said, I'm not trying to completely just bash on Marvel as a whole. I have some issues with 616, and, as I've said, I like reading Spider-Man, the current run of Spider-Man, and I like reading Avengers, and, Jed MacKay's doing a great job with, has done a great job with Avengers, and so, like, I am still liking a lot of the modern stuff in Marvel, but at the same time, it kind of feels weird to read books in a universe, Earth 616, where I like some of the storylines, but I really don't like the other ones. And then when there's events and things like that where they're coming together, it just kind of feels weird. And so I have been finding a lot of joy in reading the Ultimate books. So, your Ultimate Spider-Mans, the Ultimates, Ultimate Black Panther. I mean, a lot of these things are really good, and they're very clear jumping on points if you want to recommend it to a friend. If you yourself are maybe disillusioned with comics, you have been for a little while now, you want to get back into it, well, it's a lot easier to just pick up Ultimate Spider-Man #1 and just get caught up on that and just see that that's a good jumping on point to read about Spider-Man in this Ultimate universe. And I'll be the first to say I'm really liking the Ultimate Spider-Man storyline, because it's honestly just really fun just to get in at the ground level with him, learn all of the things with him just from the beginning, from scratch, and see the things that are working, see the things that aren't working, and just, build that relationship with him. Whereas if you're just kind of jumping into comics for the first time and you're just jumping into whatever's the current Amazing Spider-Man, then it's like, Peter Parker, Spider-Man. It's not like it's, you're discovering this character for the first time, but you can kind of grow a little bit more of a connection with somebody just seeing them become a hero from the ground up. And even outside of the Ultimate books, I'm really liking some of these other spin-off books like X-Men 97. This was a really good read. I was really devastated to find out that it was a limited 4-issue run, and it was just a prelude to the X-Men 97 show. Obviously, with the name, I knew it was going to be related, but I was hoping it was going to be, some additional arcs and different storylines that were going on that maybe the show wasn't going to do, or maybe it was going to be a retelling of the show and add more content. But unfortunately, it was just a limited 4-issue run. And I'll say I really enjoyed X-Men 97, those 4 books, more than a lot of the X-Men books that have been coming out over the last couple of years. Those 4 books really had a lot of stuff in there, and they had all of the color that you would expect from some of the classic X-Men storylines, and they had, a simple, straightforward through line for the narrative. And it was really just fun just to kind of get back to a more lighthearted, straightforward X-Men book versus the stuff that's been going on. Like, if you wanted to read about X-Men over the last, 5-6 years, there are some people that really love the whole Krakoa era, and, more power to you guys, but it's to me, it feels like homework trying to understand all of the different aspects of the story that Jonathan Hickman was introducing and all of that kind of stuff. And, and I'm not trying to bash it because it was, more complicated, that it somehow made it not a good book. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that I just feel like we got a super serious, straightforward, but then convoluted sort of mess with the Krakoa era over the last, 5-6 years. And I would just like to go back to a more lighthearted, streamlined X-Men experience. And I'm talking about X-Men so much because I love the X-Men. They were my favorite hero team growing up, watching obviously the X-Men cartoons. And so X-Men is really core. When I think about comics, I think about X-Men. And when I think about DC Comics, I think about Justice League, but that's a whole different thing. But that's just what I have ingrained in my mind. And so X-Men #1 just kind of really did it dirty for me, and this video isn't about X-Men #1, but it certainly spurred on this whole conversation. So with all that said, I'm going to be spending a lot of time in the Ultimate Universe. To me, the Ultimate Universe kind of feels like the New 52 was for DC, because the Ultimate Universe is just a really good jumping on point to just say, you want to read about Spider-Man? Here you go. You want to read about X-Men, just a whole reimagination of X-Men? Here you go. You want to read about the Ultimates, which is like the Avengers, but has a cool twist to the roster? Here you go. If you want to read about, all these different things, it's there's a world that they are building there. There is a story that they are building there. And honestly, it is far more interesting than a lot of the stuff that I've been seeing in 616, at least right now. And so eventually I'll come back to 616, but not for a while, because I'm really enjoying a lot of the new stuff that's been coming out. And even some of the stuff that's in 2099. I mean, you have your Annihilation 2099, obviously Spider-Man 2099. There's a whole other world that they're building there out in the future. And so that's just really cool to see that, these books that are building out a specific crafted universe is just really fun. And that's what I'm here for. At least right now, that's the season that I'm at with comics. So if you want to see more on how to get started in comic books in 2024, I referenced it earlier, well, you can check out this video right here, or if you want to see any of my current thoughts on the MCU, definitely check out this playlist here, and I'll catch you in either one of these 2 videos. Appreciate you watching. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.